Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Long Walk Talks. My name is David Hensley. I'm the owner and creative director of Long Walk Productions, and I am joined through the magic of technology, the frustrating magic of technology, by my two co-hosts, Stan Wilson-Lee.
Hello.
And Chris, insert nickname here, Barnes.
Also here.
Chris, we really got to figure out a good nickname for you. You already got one for This Is a Work. You don't like it when I call you Chris Wilson Barnes. What can we call you?
Why? You should love that, Chris.
How about you call me disconnected from the call?
Aw, I don't want to do that. Well, as I alluded to, this podcast is being recorded remotely, like we did with This Is a Work last weekend, to correspond with social distancing guidelines, and I personally can't wait until that is over, because we are not great at this whole remote podcasting thing. So we are going to be continuing our Quentin Tarantino quarantine discussion. Stan, go ahead and say it. I know you want to.
The Quarantino?
The Quarantino, there it is. And today we're going to be discussing Tarantino's second film, Pulp Fiction. My personal favorite of his filmography, and also probably my favorite film of all time. Stan, where does this one come in for you?
Of all time or of his filmography?
Of Tarantino's filmography.
Because it's the definitive. It's up there. But again, his recent stuff is supplanted. But it's definitely in the top three.
Nice.
But it'll like switch back and forth with the Kill Bill stuff. But Kill Bill is like number one. Once Upon a Time, number two. This is definitely rotating in 3, 4, and 5. So, but because it's what defined Tarantino,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's definitely. And after I rewatched it last night. I forgot how much of the stuff that I just thought was brilliant, and so it immediately jumped back up. So yeah, it's definitely in the top echelon. It's a great movie. And all time, it's definitely in my top 10.
Nice. All right, so like we did last time with Reservoir Dogs, we're going to start out this discussion. Chris, you have not seen this one, correct?
Just bits and pieces over the years, not the whole way through.
Okay. So like we did with Reservoir Dogs, what does Chris know about this film?
It's the characters that are mainly followed through the movie are, is it Vincent Vega?
Yes.
It's Vincent Vega and Jules, who work for, what's Ving Rhames' character's name?
Marcellus Wallace.
Marcellus Wallace. It mainly follows them, but there are other interconnected side stories. And I know bits and pieces about them, but not the entire overarching plot.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, yeah, that is pretty much correct. The film follows several different stories, and they're all, like Chris said, all interconnected. This film, it disheartens me to say, is 26 years old. This came out in 1994. Chris?
Well, you can rent a car now.
Yes, it can. Stan, how does that make you feel that Pulp Fiction is 26 years old? Excuse me.
I was like, and it's still timely because of technology or whatever. There's some stuff that looks dated.
Oh, there are some parts of this that are extremely dated now.
And I would say it would still qualify now, but I'm just, my big thing when I realized, I'm like, damn, it's 26 years old. That makes me feel old. But wait, why didn't we celebrate a 25-year anniversary of it?
Well, I'm sure somebody did out there.
We didn't do anything for its 25th, did we?
You mean we personally, as in the three of us, or like the world as a whole? Because I know yes. I didn't do any sort of 25th anniversary celebration. No parties or anything like that were held.
No, we didn't have like a special cast or any podcast of it or anything like that. So yeah, it's like, and after watching, I'm like, that would have been a perfect film to do a 25th anniversary discussion about. But yeah, it's 26 years old now, and I was like, damn, this holds up. Because I'm older than you, so
yeah.
So that means you saw it when you were like a baby. So I was just out of I was just out of college the first time when it came out. So
Okay.
I had yet to get to Chicago, so it was right before I left for Chicago.
All right. Well, I saw this for the first time in 2002, so I don't know how much of a baby that would make me. I was 16 years old at the time. And it's been 16 years. Now, when I saw this in 2002, it was only 8 years old, and that's part of what makes me feel so old about this is wow. Wow. But anyway,
Uh, did you have any knowledge of it going into seeing it your first time since you had 8 years, or did you like kind of accidentally fall into it? Because I know in this area it probably wasn't as talked about as much as it was from where I was from and everything. So I was just wondering, since you were 16 already and it was 8 years old already, did you have any preconceptions going into it, and did it surprise you when you saw it?
the only real preconceptions that I had about the film were what I knew from pop culture. Like there have been a lot of Tarantino references and some overt Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction references
Right.
in The Simpsons.
Okay.
And it kind of permeated pop culture throughout that time. But as far as like Tarantino or really the film itself, any preconceived notions, I really didn't. But thanks to the magic of the internet and thanks to the way that I just started binging films or when I was 15 and 16 years old, this is the same way that I got into Robert Rodriguez and Kevin Smith and a lot of the
Yeah.
big auteur directors of the 90s is what is their first film? Okay, I'm going to go out and find it. So I saw Clerks, I saw El Mariachi, I saw Reservoir Dogs, and then I wanted to continue on with these nominal works. So that took me to Mallrats and Desperado and then to Pulp Fiction.
Did it kick your ass when you finally saw it, or because I know I actually saw it in the theater, and when it came out, and all I know it was a new experience in the movies.
Yeah, it was completely different from anything I had ever seen up until that point. So as far as kicking my ass goes, yeah, it really did.
Yeah.
It really opened me up to an entirely brand new world of cinema. That sounds really pretentious to say, but that's how it felt.
But that's also how you got introduced to John Travolta, right? So it's like you got him at his good time.
Yeah, I guess that's one way of putting it. This falls into a weird time for Travolta because when most people think of John Travolta, they think of the late 70s and early 80s, the Staying Alive
Right.
and Saturday Night Fever era, or they think of the late 90s, early aughts, insane person John Travolta, like the Battlefield Earth John Travolta.
Well, no,
And
you're
this is not-
forgetting something. You're forgetting the he had just before doing this he had just done the third Look Who's Talking movie.
Oh, that's right.
That's true.
I didn't so much forget about that as I think I repressed it.
Well, now the first one was really good, and it was the next two that followed that really kind of sunk him. He didn't work for a couple years until he did Pulp Fiction again.
Yeah.
Until
Yep.
he did Pulp Fiction.
Now, was
So,
the
yeah.
Look Who's Talking with the Dogs, was that before or after Pulp Fiction?
Before it was like I think the last thing he did before he did Pulp Fiction.
Wow.
So there's a Look Who's Talking with Dogs. I thought it was just babies.
Yeah, I think the first
What?
three are all babies, and then the fourth
First
one is
two.
dog. The first two? Okay, so it's the third one
There's
that has
not
the
a
dogs.
fourth one. Yeah, the third one is Look Who's Talking Now.
Mercifully, there is no fourth one.
Yeah.
Well, we can change that.
We can. Well, considering the fact that this film, before we went off the rails where I was going with that, is considering that this film is 26 years old at this point, we're not going to, one, worry about spoilers, and two, I'm not really going to go over the plot as a whole. What I am going to go over before we get into any big discussions is the chronological timeline of the film, because in true Tarantino fashion, this is told very non-linearly. It differs from Reservoir Dogs, though, because even though Tarantino says that he doesn't refer to the flashbacks in the film as flashbacks, that's pretty much exactly what they are. Pulp Fiction doesn't really utilize flashbacks so much as it does just jump all over the damn place. So you have to, it's not like it's exactly hard to do like a lot of later films like Memento or something like that, where you really have to sit and focus on when does this scene take place chronologically. But looking at the chronological timeline of the film does make it a little strange. As somebody on Reddit pointed out, if you were to watch this film chronologically, you'd be watching two very different films at about the halfway point. The first half of this film are the plucky misadventures of two hitmen, while the second half of the film would be the gritty tale of a disgraced boxer. But chronologically, the film begins with the post-prologue sequence of the film, which is Jules and Vincent arriving at Brent's apartment. And then from there, we go on to what happens later in the film, where after they have killed Brent and his roommate and gotten Marcellus Wallace's suitcase back, as they are leaving with Marvin, played by Phil Lamar, Vince accidentally shoots him in the face.
In the face.
One of the most famous scenes in movie history. I accidentally shot Marvin in the face, which leads to the entire sequence where they go to Jimmy's house. Jimmy is played by Quentin Tarantino, continuing the tradition of his casual racism. We're actually heavily building upon that.
I genuinely have a question about this.
Okay.
I mean, you said last time we were talking about the Reservoir Dogs. He grew up in a heavily, primarily black neighborhood.
That's the story. Yeah. Now,
That's
how
the story.
true that is, I don't know.
What bugs me about him about that being the story is then he wouldn't he know better?
One would think, yeah.
How much he would know it would hurt it hurts that community to just throw that word around.
Well, yeah, it's like how apparently from what I have heard, Eminem thought that he had those privileges in the mid 90s when he was first starting a rap career, until somebody else in the rap community shut that down for him pretty hard, and now it's considered an old shame of his.
Yeah, because you never do as a white person.
No, one would think that somebody at some point would have laid that down for Tarantino as well, but no, because especially as you go on and you get into films like Django and Hateful Eight, everyone just seems pretty cool with him saying it.
Well, at least there it's contextual.
Yeah, there it's contextual. I'm thinking more specifically of how Samuel L. Jackson seems pretty okay. There's never been anything, and you'd think you'd have heard it by now in the era of Me Too, when we're calling people out on things like this. You'd think at some point somebody that he would have worked with up to this point, like Samuel L. Jackson or Ving Rhames, would have come out and said, yeah, that's not cool.
I get the feeling that those roles are where he gets it out.
I would hope so, yeah. I'd hope that he's not Hulk Hoganing it and just saying it casually.
That leads me back to the question of this scene, because what is the context of their relationship with Quentin's character, Jimmy?
So there is no context essentially for Vincent, John Travolta's character, but
right.
Jules, Samuel L. Jackson's character, mentions offhand on the way to his house after Vincent has shot Marvin in the face. He mentions that Jimmy is an old partner of his in Toluca Lake, California, out in the suburbs. So they go and they park Jules's car in Jimmy's garage, and it's about 8 o'clock in the morning, and Jimmy is very hostile about the whole thing.
Because the only way I can contextualize that in my head, because I have heard the scene, or I've seen that part before, is that he's only saying it like that because he's pissed at them for showing up
at his place.
Yeah.
There's also
45 minutes before his wife, who is African American, is supposed to get home. Yeah,
that adds an added element of confusion to it and frustration to it, because he's saying this, and part of the conflict of the scene is that he really doesn't want his wife getting home from work and discovering that two criminals have brought a dead body to his house. But like Stan said, his wife, Jimmy's wife, as shown in an imagined spot of what would happen if she came home, Bonnie, his wife, is black. So
it just comes off as that makes it okay, but
yeah, because the only other characters in the film to use the word are Ving Rhames and Samuel L. Jackson, who are black, and the two redneck white trash rapists.
Jimmy's not supposed to be seen as a sympathetic character.
Oh no, hardly.
Um,
The only way I can justify it in my head is that, again, Jules has brought a problem to his doorstep in the wee hours of the morning. So he's just doing this just to pick at him because he knows Jules is in a vulnerable spot.
Jimmy's freaked out. I mean, it's 8:30 in the morning. He just got out of bed, and because it starts off with the whole coffee thing, and Jimmy's just like, okay, we don't got time. I know my coffee's good because Bonnie buys shit. So I want to taste my coffee. So here's the deal. Why is there a dead person in my garage, and specifically a dead black man? It's like, what did you guys do, and why did you bring it to my doorstep? So I think, Chris, you're totally right, is that he's just illustrating it.
He's trying to get a rile out of Jules.
Yeah. I get that much, yeah.
And I think the added implication is also supposed to be that him and Jules go so far back that Jules doesn't care, and Jimmy doesn't care anything about saying it in front of Vincent, who he doesn't know and has no concerns about whatsoever. But that's a long way of saying, maybe all of that. We're in the film proper. We're not given any context whatsoever for why Jimmy is so flippant about using the word. But from the Bonnie situation, once that is resolved chronologically, the film moves into Vincent and Jules going to the diner for breakfast, which leads immediately into the opening scene of the film, which is Ringo and Honey Bunny having breakfast and deciding to rob the place, which leads through what is actually the ending of the film. So from there, we go to Vincent and Jules arriving at Marcellus Wallace's bar, where he is having a conversation with Bruce Willis's character, Butch, about throwing a boxing match. Now, here's where the actual timeline of the film gets interesting, depending on whether or not you believe that Butch is the one who keyed Vincent's car. Because in a later scene where Vincent goes to visit his drug dealer, he mentions to his drug dealer, Lance, that a few days ago somebody keyed my car. So if it was really Butch, then a few days have passed since this. If it wasn't Butch, then all these events could be occurring on the same day, which puts the timeline of this film roughly about 2 days. But whatever the case may be, chronologically from that point after they have their conversation with Marcellus, then Vincent has to take Marcellus's wife, Mia, out on a date. She accidentally ODs. They have to take care of that whole situation. Presumably on that same night or close to it is when Butch has his boxing match. And then we proceed on with the rest of the Gold Watch story, in which he and Marcellus get kidnapped by rednecks and sexually assaulted. So the film, if presented chronologically, should begin with Jules and Vincent on their way to Brent's apartment and should end with Butch and Fabian leaving on the chopper. So Stan, out of everything that happens in this film and all the stories that are presented, do you have a favorite scene, a favorite particular story? What is the highlight of this film for you?
I think the opening sequence, the prologue in the diner, I think will hands down go. We talked about this with Reservoir, how Tarantino always has really great cold openings, or at least in his early stuff. But this cold opening, but I guess would be the cold closing in a sense. But
the cold middle.
The cold middle, yeah. Honey Bunny and
Ringo.
Oh shit, Ringo are talking to each other in their booth, but just how they're planning, and you don't know right off the bat, but then they go into planning that they're going to rob this diner. That'll hands down go as one of my favorite openings of a movie ever. And I had forgotten a little bit before I rewatched it. I'm like, oh fuck yeah, this is the best opening. And I texted you about this when Mia overdoses and they got to go to Eric Stoltz as Lance. That whole sequence, I think that is one of the greatest sequences of all time. I love it. I love it. I love it. I didn't remember ever liking Fabian as much as I did last night when I was watching it. And I thought she was great. It might be because I've seen her in other stuff since then, the actor. that whole sequence with Butch and Fabian, and you said the same thing about that when the breakdown scene when
Oh yeah,
he
Butch's
forgets the
breakdown over
watch.
forgetting the watch.
And I know how you love his breakdown scene of it, but her response to him just destroying the room,
The
looking
wounded
for the
puppy.
watch. Yes, and it comes back at the end when he brings the chopper back, and he kind of tells her to hurry up. They got to go. But she is just so fucking great. But yeah, I don't remember liking Fabian as much as I did. I thought she was always a weak point. That section was a weak point in the movie, and I don't know why I thought that, because she's fantastic. And so yeah, the gold watch section became much more poignant to me. My favorite, it always comes back to Winston Wolfe, Harvey Keitel, uh, one of the greatest put down speeches to John Travolta, and the fact that John Travolta got to take it. But when he said, "Okay, if I seem curt, it's because we don't have time," But yeah, Winston Wolfe will always be my favorite thing in Pulp Fiction.
One of the most perfectly composed dressing downs of another character.
Yes, yes.
But for me personally, it's the magic of this film is always going to come back to that last scene between Jules and Ringo. The entire speech that last monologue from Jules is just so beautifully written and so beautifully performed by Samuel L. Jackson that it gets me. I'm fully engaged every time, and I cannot tell you how many times I have seen this movie since 2002, but I'm always 100% in when it gets to that scene.
And again, Amanda Plummer in that scene, and all she's doing is, "Don't you hurt him? Don't you hurt him?" That
Oh yeah, the progression of her from like the badass robber into the scared child is also fantastic.
It's wonderful, and Tim Roth as Ringo in that moment, and basically all he's doing is looking Samuel L. in the eyes, but just his response, and to go from Reservoir and how he related with Harvey Keitel to how he relates with Jules in Pulp Fiction, again, another, prototypical Tarantino actor, just enjoy the speech being given to you. You don't have to talk at all. You don't have to memorize a line. You don't have to, just listen and be enthralled by what you're being told. And yeah, Tim Roth is great in it too. But yeah, that section is wonderful.
Nice. Well, continuing on with what we started in the Reservoir Dogs episode, Tarantino first, and I don't know if either of you can contribute more to this than what I noticed, but to me, it didn't really look like there were a whole lot of firsts from him. There's a lot of continuations of trends that he started with Reservoir Dogs. Obviously, the same kind of dialogue and flow that he's got, the use of pop culture music, the use of pretty extreme violence. I'd say that really what this marks for him is the first but definitely not last appearances of Samuel L. Jackson and Uma Thurman. Did you guys notice anything that became a Tarantino-ism with Pulp Fiction that wasn't present in Reservoir Dogs?
And I guess the exploration of foot massages started here, didn't it?
Yeah, there wasn't really a whole lot of focus put on Tarantino's foot fetish in Reservoir Dogs, but here it is on full display. We get several
Is this
very.
where he started ramping it up?
Oh yeah, there are several shots of Uma Thurman's feet that are shot and edited the way one would expect a sequence about the Mona Lisa to be. And then, of course, Butch's cab driver is also driving a cab barefoot, and we get a shot of her bare feet as well. That's a good call. I hadn't thought about that.
And Uma Thurman's a little tall for me, but when she's in bare feet, she has really, really, really pretty feet. And so maybe that's why I was able to relate to it so much when I saw it, is because of my, personal foot fetish. It was acknowledged and it was, glorified. So I didn't feel bad and feel perverted about my stuff anymore. So
Well, we're going to move right the hell on from that before you divulge too much more information about your foot fetish to our listeners. I can hear
Play
the
remote.
I can hear the unsubscribe button being hit.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was I being loud?
You can't see that I'm naked anyway. So it's
Oh
like,
God. All right. Well, moving on from Tarantino first is Tarantino film connections. So, um, Mia Wallace, Uma Thurman's character, mentions that she was an actress and in a pilot for a TV show called Fox Force 5 about a team of assassins, which is pretty much the background for what she did in as the bride in Kill Bill, which makes me wonder, since Tarantino has said that he essentially has two universes, the real world and then the realer than real world, and characters in the real world might watch films from the realer than real world. It makes me wonder if after this, Mia Wallace went on to become an actress and star in a movie called Kill Bill that was based on this pilot that she was once in. If that sounds like reaching to you, I'm sorry, but it sounds pretty on par with Tarantino in my opinion.
No, it sounds like the kind of thing he'd do.
Yeah.
Another fun fact. This is actually related to something I enjoy more, but Fox Force 5 is basically a pastiche of various films, including one called Angel's Revenge, which was used in an episode of Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Interesting. Did not know that.
I can't remember if I've shown you that episode before, but yeah, they did that as an episode.
Nice. Well, also,
and isn't Fox Force, doesn't it come back when in Jackie Brown where they're showing, because there's that series they're watching on TV.
no, that in that sequence, I wish I could remember the title of it, and we'll get there in when do we talk about Jackie Brown? I think that's in June. We'll talk about it more, but I want to just say it's called Girls with Guns.
Okay.
Like whenever Samuel L. Jackson's character is trying to sell somebody on buying guns from him, he shows them this ridiculous series of commercials or TV show. I don't know what it's supposed to be. I don't remember in universe, but it's essentially just women in bikinis firing guns.
Which is another weird fetish in and of itself.
Yeah.
That is a distinct fetish that I found out
Girls
about on the
with guns,
internet.
man.
Specifically, yeah.
Yeah. Well, this also continues the use of red apple cigarettes, as we saw in Reservoir Dogs and in pretty much all of his other films. And here's a fun one that I learned last night thanks to TV tropes. Red apple cigarettes are also featured in Romy and Michelle's high school reunion, the Lisa Kudrow movie from the 90s.
Yeah. It's Lisa Kudrow and, I forget who the other
Mira
actress
Sorvino.
is. Yes.
Wow. So they smoke red apple cigarettes in there, huh?
And I bet that was Mira's thing because she was dating Quentin at the time, so she probably was, let's just use red apple cigarettes.
There's a weird fact that I always forget that the two of them dated. Well, we also...
Well, she was the daughter of one of his heroes, so
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
Well,
probably
that adds
planned it.
Yeah, that adds an
That is
extra level of weirdness to it now that you point
it
that
has a
out.
creepy little tinge to it, doesn't it?
So she is Paul Sorvino's daughter?
Yes.
Wow. Okay, yeah, that just keeps getting weirder.
That's kind of. I'm not saying it's as bad, but it's kind of in the same ballpark as Michael Jackson dating Lisa Marie Presley.
Yeah. All right. Well, this Pulp Fiction also gives us the other Vega brother, Vincent Vega, played by John Travolta. He is the brother of Vic Vega from Reservoir Dogs, as portrayed by Michael Madsen. And it's just too bad that we are never going to get that Vega Brothers movie. And now...
And did you know that it was supposed to be Vic in that role, but Michael Madsen decided to do Wyatt Earp instead?
I did not know that. That would be so odd seeing Vic Vega in that role. Yeah, since the two brothers, their personalities are so different. Well, and so finally the last thing, when last we see Jules in the film, after he has received what he considers a revelation and he's decided to give up the life of a hitman and he's going to go and wander the earth like Kane in Kung Fu. Well, I can't say the next time we see him, but potentially. Stan, how do you feel about the idea that Jules went on to become the piano player at that church in Texas that we see at the beginning of Kill Bill Volume 2.
I would not be surprised about that at all, because I was going to extend what you were talking about, that Mia became an actress and and the bride had seen a movie but no, I was saying Mia became the bride in a way. She went on and found what's his face and was going to marry him, and then she got hooked up with Bill and after Marcellus, and
She divorced Marcellus and changed her name to Beatrix Kiddo.
yeah.
All right.
Maybe her real name is Beatrix, but I would have gone that far with that.
Nothing is out of the range of possibility here.
And then, so if Samuel L. Is he the piano player in?
Yeah. Samuel L. Jackson plays the piano player in the church where the bride was supposed to get married before Bill and the rest of not Fox Force 5 shows up and shoots the place up.
Yeah. So yeah, I would not have a problem believing that, because when he mentioned his walk, his walk in the earth, I'm like, yeah, he would have done all of that stuff. And again, that also places Samuel L. Jackson in every other Tarantino movie.
Well, yeah, pretty much. He's part of the Kill Bill universe. Well, he's not in Inglourious Bastards. As far as we know, maybe he was, and he's just not on screen.
Right.
All right, well, moving into what I consider the meat of the discussion, because this is something I've debated with other people from a storytelling aspect, because I've been outspoken as a writer about how I feel storytelling, in whatever form it is, whether it's poetry, screenwriting, writing prose, playwriting, whatever it is, telling a story and telling the story that you want to tell should be your first and foremost concern, and that trying to impart a moral into the story that you want your audience to walk away with isn't, in my opinion, entirely necessary. You should be telling a story first. And this, when I'm trying to describe my feelings on this to other people, Pulp Fiction is the story that I use to illustrate that. So Stan and Chris as well, what would you say if you had to, what is the moral of Pulp Fiction?
Don't shoot people in the face. But
yeah, trigger control is important.
Trigger control is important.
Both very good points. Don't shoot people in the face, and trigger control is important.
A lot of people believe it is Jules and Vincent's story. I think a lot of it is Butch's story. The idea of discovering your place, and because Butch doesn't realize he has a place until Fabian comes around, and he says, "Okay, I'm doing this for her." And Jules figures it out at the end when he decides to walk the earth, and that's right before Vincent is killed by Butch. So I kind of agree with you that I don't think he set out to have a moral, but I think he set out to write them into a place where they actually discovered what their place on this earth was or was going to be.
Chris, did you have any thoughts on what the possible moral of this film might be?
Not really. Mostly because hearing the discussion about it, it's mostly because it's one of those types of stories where just events and people converge. It's not necessarily like you said, it's not necessarily a linear story. It's more that things and events are coming together at the same time. Because Tarantino has made, with Reservoir Dogs and ones after, he's made more linear stories that have a direct outcome, and overall, it just ends up being like it's one of those types of stories that's immediately set up for death of the author, where people can just derive what meaning they want out of what they just saw.
Mm-hmm.
That's mostly what I feel. Because he's got. I'm sure he made the points he wanted to make, but at the same time, it's just he's left so much up to you debate it however you want. Specifically, like the briefcase, like you said, Dave. He told the story he wanted to tell, and everything else is just on you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the most common theme or moral that I see people trying to put on this film is that it's a story about redemption. And I can see that to an extent, especially with, that can definitely be applied to 2 out of your 3 protagonists. Does Jules redeem himself by not killing Ringo and Bunny and letting them go at the end? Does Butch really redeem himself? I mean,
Well, maybe it's too high a notch to say redemption. Maybe it's about if you're actually given the option for a second chance, what do you do with it?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say that's a much better
Which
summary
yeah,
there.
which the robbery scene kind of sums up best, because Jules is giving those robbers the second chance to do something better.
Yeah, and Butch definitely embraces a second chance when he goes back and he saves Marcellus rather than letting him be killed by the 2 rednecks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the second chance idea better. To me, this film, if you had to apply a moral to it, is horrible things can happen at any time, anywhere. Because that's every scene of the film. It starts off with that conversation in the diner where Ringo and Honey Bunny are having a very quiet, whispered conversation between themselves, and ends with them pulling out their guns and getting on top of the table and screaming at the other patrons that it's a robbery. Then the very next scene, Jules and Vincent have several different conversations, all very friendly and quiet, until they get to Brett's apartment, and Jules casually shoots a guy on a couch, and then they murder Brett. And it's on like that through the whole movie. Vincent and Mia have a very nice date until she accidentally snorts heroin, and then everything goes to shit. So, yeah, if pressed to call... Sorry, go ahead.
And then not to say nothing of Marcellus Wallace getting captured by rednecks who want to sodomize him.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, if pushed to apply a moral to this film, it would be that horrible things happen out of nowhere for no apparent reason. So when Katie and I were watching this last night and we see Butch on screen for the first time, she said, "I always forget that Bruce Willis is in this." And I think that is a crime because the film tends to be so overshadowed by Vincent and Jules' story that it's easy to forget an entire third of this film is dedicated to Bruce Willis's character, Butch, and that story and how horrifically off the rails everything goes for him. Do either of you guys have any thoughts on that?
Oh, well, I think it's a testament to Tarantino's way with dialogue that you remember the interactions between Vega and Jules the most, and then you kind of forget about the actual real dramatic journey that Butch is going through on his own almost.
Yeah, like Stan and I were talking about when we were messaging last night, his freak out in their hotel room when he can't find his watch. It's probably one of the best freak outs ever committed to film, and I cannot help but feel horrible for Fabian every time I watch that scene. If you don't cringe while watching her like back up and get on the floor up against the wall, you have no soul. It's heartbreaking to watch him lose his shit.
Yeah, he keeps and Tarantino keeps the camera on Fabian for most of that, and you just hear the noise and witness her going through the emotions of hearing the noise, and then it'll quickly go back to Butch throwing stuff around and yelling at her, and then come back to her. So the time he spends with her in that moment when it was Butch's freak out, but it was more important that we see how it affects Fabian, and I think that's ended up one of the reasons why I ended up enjoying her so much this time for the first time. But yeah, that's a great. And then it carries on after the hotel room. Then he's in his car, and it continues, and which probably influenced P.T. Anderson for the Ricky, "I'm an idiot, I'm a fucking idiot" moment in Boogie Nights. But Fuck, how did she forget that? How did she forget that? The only thing I asked her to get. Don't forget to watch.
I've always enjoyed the fact that Butch has that freak out in the motel room and then tries to calm himself down and apologize to Fabian. And then it jump cuts to him still freaking out in her car on the way back to the apartment.
Yes.
But yeah, I had to crash that Honda. Yeah, it's criminally underappreciated, the whole Butch segment of the film. So, to wrap us up here, I want to talk about something, or at least read something that I found yesterday on TV Tropes, that in all the times that I've watched this film since 2002, I have never noticed this or thought about this. If you take the Gold Watch segment, especially the beginning of it, which features Christopher Walken in the flashback bringing the watch to young Butch, one of the funniest scenes ever committed to film. It's easy to forget that this film is genuinely hilarious for all of its shocking
Yeah.
violence and everything else. That the scene where he has that monologue about how he got yeah, how he got this watch back to young Butch is fantastic. But if you consider that scene the perfect like midway point in the story, then every scene beginning to end is a perfect mirror of each other. So if the Gold Watch is the middle point, then the first and last scenes are in that diner. We start with Honey Bunny and Ringo, and we end with them in the diner interacting with Jules and Vincent. The second scene in the film is Jules and Vincent going to Brett's place. The next to last scene is essentially an extended segment after they leave Brett's place. And then after that, the scene where in the beginning Jules kills Brett, then third from last, immediately after what happens when Jules kills Brett. The fourth scene is Marcellus and Butch making a deal. In this situation, the deal is that Butch is going to throw the fight. The fourth from last scene is Marcellus and Butch making another deal, which is that Butch is going to stay out of LA. He's lost his LA
And not
privileges.
talk about what happened.
Yep. Then the fifth scene, Vincent and Butch have a nasty encounter. That is their scene at the bar where Vince is antagonistic for no reason. Fifth from last, you have Vince and Butch have a nasty encounter, which is Butch killing Vincent in the bathroom of his apartment. And then right before the Gold Watch segment, they have what they call the first romantic story ending in disaster, which is Vincent's date with Mia, which ends with her overdosing. And then immediately after the Gold Watch segment, you have the second romantic story ending in disaster, which is Butch and Fabian. They say in this write up that I'm reading, it ends in disaster. For Butch and Fabian, it doesn't because the two of them managed to get away. But that scene pretty much does end in disaster for Butch and Marcellus. But I think looking at it this way, having never thought about it before, that is fascinating to me how well these scenes mirror each other.
Do you think Tarantino knew that?
I don't know, and it might be a bit of a stretch to look at it that way, but considering how history tends to repeat itself in this film, I think that's just a really interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah.
I think considering how obsessive he is with everything, I think he knew when to place those scenes.
How to structure that story, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is pretty brilliant if you think about it.
Yeah.
You know, and for a guy that didn't ever get learning for this stuff, and I'm doing the air quote things, you know, this is just coming right out of his head. So for him to consciously, you know, all these scenes mirror each other. And yet, so in a way, it is a linear story if you think about it that way. It's just looking in a mirror. So if he was conscious about that, that's a pretty brilliant concept.
Yep. All right. Well, we're going to wrap things up here with one last question, which is, Chris, even though I know you haven't seen it all the way through, maybe you can still have an answer. Did this film introduce you guys to any lines that you still use? And I ask because ever since I heard the phrase, "My name's Paul and this shit's between y'all," I use that in conversation whenever I can. I love that phrase so much. So did this film give you guys a phrase that you still enjoy or bust out on occasion that doesn't involve the N-word, please?
There are lines from movies that, yeah, and I wanted to make this a segment on an episode someday where it's like lines from movies you love, but you don't really get to use, or that you throw them out and people aren't gonna get them. And I have moments like that a lot. But there are two from Pulp Fiction, actually, surprisingly. The first one is just in the context of this horrible shit is over and I'm done with it and I'm walking away from it. It's just Zed's dead.
Zed's dead, baby. Zed's
Yep.
dead.
It's done with. And I think the other one, the other good line for shit has gone wrong is I shot Marvin in the face.
That should be a way of communicating between the three of us when something has gone wrong.
It's like that's the opener to let people know that something went wrong. I shot Marvin in the face.
Brilliant. Thank you. Stan, what about you? Do you have anything?
Shot Marvin in the face, definitely. And then Zed's dead, definitely. I say Zed's dead a lot for some reason, and probably not even in context, but I do say, but yeah, I agree with Chris on that. Zed's dead is perfect for a lot of stuff. I don't say it as much as I used to, but, and I'm probably going to forget it, but that's a motherfucking good milkshake. Maybe not $5 worth, but that's a fucking good shake.
Nice.
I totally said it wrong, but that whole milkshake section in the diner and Jackrabbit Slims is one of the great moments put on celluloid for me. I should have mentioned that when we were talking about favorite moments, but the Jackrabbit Slim section is brilliant. And so a lot of the stuff they say in that area, the uncomfortable silence stuff, that's all stuff I've used before in allusion to it. But yeah, that's a motherfucking good. And that's actually maybe not the lines itself, but I actually became a fan of the shared milkshake concept because of that movie. Every date I would go on after that, we would have to go to, because in Chicago there was a 50s style diner place that did shakes and stuff. I'd always order a single shake with 2 straws for me and my date.
Yeah, but did you get it Amos and Andy or Martin and Lewis?
Most of mine but I would get strawberry shakes. But I guess the ones I shared would probably be more the Martin and Lewis. But I don't know what you would call a strawberry shake. But the ones I shared are probably Martin and Lewis. And I would say that's a motherfucking good shake, man.
Chris, what were you going to say?
Well, I was just going to say, apparently, in one area, Tarantino and I share a wavelength because I've been accidentally quoting that milkshake line for years because I say stuff like that all the time about food.
Yeah.
Like this is good. It wasn't blank amount of money good, but it was pretty good. And I've never realized I was never actively quoting it, but I say it like that all the time.
And it's perfect allusion to it too, man, because it's like you're watching it and you're just like, yeah, that's exactly what it would be. I don't know if it's $5 good, but
yeah. See, we talked briefly at the beginning of this episode about how dated some sections of it are. Vincent makes such a big deal about Mia's milkshake costing $5. If now I ordered a milkshake
it's $75 now, man.
Yeah, now if I ordered a milkshake and somebody said it's $5, I'd be like, all right, here you go. Here's your $5. It's also hilarious how dated their cell phones are to me, and not just
the block one.
Yeah, not just the block phones that Vincent and Jules both use at different times in the film. It's the reactions to cell phone usage.
Oh, yeah.
Because when Vince calls Lance while he's taking Mia to Lance's house, Lance has that moment where he goes, "Are you calling me on a cellular phone? I don't know you. Prank call.
And then Tim Roth, Ringo uses cellular phone when he's collecting wallets too. He says, "Is that a cellular phone?" In the bag.
Yep, cellular phones, everybody.
Cellular. Oh,
it's the thing of the future.
Cellular phone.
All right.
But yeah, that Lance moment was great. Fuck you, Lance. But I was going to ask you, David, because I'm not sure if Chris would know this, but you know how Butch is looking for weapons before he goes back to save Marcellus.
Yeah.
And he, picks up the hammer, and then he picks up the baseball bat, then he picks up the chainsaw. And I know it's allusions to a bunch of stuff, but then he finds the katana, right?
Are you about to ask me if that's a Hattori Hanzo sword that he picks up?
That's what I was going to ask you, if that is. I know it's not foreshadowing because I don't know if he knew about Kill Bill at the time, but because I know I'm reading in here that it's referencing some of the Japanese samurai films and stuff
Yeah.
on that pick. But the idea that he is going to use it again in Kill Bill, I'm wondering if it's the actual. Is it the sword that the bride uses?
Oh, is it the bride's sword? No, because that was made
Okay,
for her by Hattori Hanzo when
true,
she
true, yeah.
goes to see him in Volume 1. But is it a Hattori Hanzo sword? Maybe, because certainly Bud, Michael Madsen's character from Kill Bill, couldn't have been the first person to pawn one, despite the fact that they
And
are
with,
supposedly priceless.
that's the kind of stuff that if Tarantino cared about Twitter, he would tweet out like J.K. Rowling. He would just be constantly giving tidbits like that.
Yes, exactly. That's part of why I'm glad that Tarantino does not have a Twitter. Can you imagine what a disaster that would be?
Oh God, I love this movie.
I do too. It is my favorite of Tarantino's films. And coming up in June, I believe we're going to be covering my second favorite Tarantino film, Jackie Brown. But before we get to that, either later this month or in early May, we're going to have another non Tarantino related episode before we discuss our first double feature of True Romance and Natural Born Killers. So that's going to be the first non Tarantino episode is going to be late April or early May, and then the True Romance Natural Born Killers episode will be around this time in May. So did you guys have any final thoughts, or did you want to give the listeners someplace they can follow you, reach out to you, anything like that?
Stan, you want to go first?
I'm good.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
my only final thought is, I would definitely label this movie a good movie, despite having seen so little of it, because of how clearly it's resonated in our pop culture.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because it's like, even if it's not something I enjoy, you can tell there's something worthwhile in it easily. I mean, like I said, just because how much has resonated over the 26 years it's been out.
Yeah, 26 came out in
It's
94.
it's permanently affected movies and pop culture.
You know, there is one question that I wanted to ask and did not put down on our notes that I'm glad I thought of right here as we're ending. Stan and Chris, this soundtrack is one of the most famous film soundtracks of all time. Do either of you have a favorite song or a favorite musical cue from the film and the way that it's used? Anything like that?
I absolutely do, and I was waiting for the question about it. Urge Overkill's version of "You're a Woman Now." Mia
Oh,
pops
yeah,
on,
Girl, You'll Be a Woman Soon.
"Girl, You'll Be a Woman Soon."
Yes.
We talked about the placement of music Tarantino does in Reservoir,
Mm-hmm.
but the music he places in this, especially like again at Jackrabbit Slims, the songs that come up during that period. Again, another character, perfect song for Mia's descent into hell.
Yeah.
To introduce her into what is going to happen to her, and then juxtaposed with Jules's or Vincent's stuff in the bathroom, making sure he doesn't do anything too forward with her. I think it's perfect placement.
You're going to go home, you're going to jerk off, and that's all you're going to
Yes.
do. Yeah.
And
It's another one of my favorite scenes. Chris,
Yeah.
did you have any thoughts on favorite use of music in the film?
Well, honestly, not especially, because I honestly don't know what's in on the soundtrack for the most part. Let me ask this. I know they use the surf rock, the Dick Dale stuff in the movie?
Yes, they
Yes.
do.
Okay, that because I know that's kind of ubiquitous with it, and that really got that's really honestly because how I heard it for the first time,
Mm-hmm.
and I do enjoy that, and it ended up being a reason I found at least one artist that I know of whose stuff I enjoy because of that.
Yeah, so Miserlou from Dick Dale and his Deltones.
Yes,
that's the opening, and then skipping to the end here because I've got a list pulled up. Surf Rider by the Lively Ones is what ends the film.
Yeah,
So
and
two surf songs.
I may have heard some of the songs from the movie before, just without realizing that's where they would have originally come from.
Yeah,
In terms of me hearing them.
yeah. For me personally, my favorite use of music and sequence in the film is the Son of a Preacher Man scene when Vincent arrives to pick Mia up. Love that song.
Yeah.
Love the way that it's used. Love that scene. So that's what we've got in terms of Pulp Fiction. Stan, I know that you are social media distancing as well as social distancing, and I promise that's probably the last time that I'm going to use that joke.
At least till the next episode.
Yep. Chris, if our listeners want to reach out to you or follow you, how can they do that?
Well, they haven't yet, but Twitter is the easiest place to argue with me. I'm at Chris the OK. That's OKAY, the full word.
Nice. All right. And if you want to follow me online, the best place to do that would probably be Instagram. My handle is at DBHensley. If you want to follow the podcast, you can search for us on Facebook by searching Long Walk Talks and This Is a Work. If you want to follow our company, Long Walk Productions, you can search for that on Facebook or go to facebook.com/longwalkpro. And if you look in the show notes, you will see YouTube links to our podcast channel, which includes this show along with our sister shows, This Is a Work and This Is a Takeover, hosted by Gina Belmont and Shelby Ray. So you can find all of that through following those links, and you can also see more of our original content. If you enjoyed this show, please make sure to leave us a rating and a review on whatever platform that you're listening on. So, Chris, Stan, thank you very much for joining me for this discussion. And we'll be back in a few weeks with something not Tarantino related.
Peace out.
That is a tasty burger.